Hello everyone and welcome to an episode of Crackin' Packin' Likin'. We today are going to review the deck that I had built for my girlfriend. She never played Magic. I think she'd only heard about it once or twice before. So I built this deck in order to give her something to play that would be easy to use and good for a first-time player. So we have Vorinclex, Monsterous Raider. He is a 4 mana and 2 green, so 6 total, a 6/6 trample haste. And then the important part is if you would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many on each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. Basically, you get to double the amount of counters that you place on things, and then if an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many of those counters rounded down. So if you're putting 1 counter on there, you're not getting any. If you're putting 2, you get 1. If you put 3, you get 1. So we're going to go ahead and pull this out. Now, I did get the lands sorted out. So we have a nice little chunk of forests up top. And being in mono green, you don't really need to diversify your lands too much. It's a nice shiny one. All right. Oh, and that's actually non-basic. Okay. So you got a little stack of forests going on. We're going to set him up here. Now we're going to review the different lands. We only have a couple, 3 different lands that are non-basic. So you've got a command tower. There's no real reason for it to be in here other than it's a command tower. This is commander. Now Cryptic Caves, you can tap it. You pay 1, tap it, sack, draw a card. And then this one is a little bit of ramp. Pay 3 and a green, tap it, sack, put 2 basics on the battlefield. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get moving into the bulk of the deck. So the theme is very much +1/+1 counters. So pretty much any creature that is in here is going to have, in some way or form, +1/+1 counters being put on it. You got Splitting Hydra for 5 mana, so 3 and 2 green. It's a 3/3, but then it has Monstrous for 4 and 2 green. And if this creature isn't monstrous, put 3 1/1 counters on it, so your commander be 6, and then it becomes monstrous. When it becomes monstrous, you put a token that's a copy of it on the battlefield. So basically, it just replicates itself. You've got Hooded Hydra. You've got X and then 2 green. Enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. When it dies, you put a 1/1 green snake onto the battlefield for each 1/1 counter on it. And then it has Morph, so 3 and a green, so you can play it for its Morph cost face down, and then you would flip it. When it's turned face up, put 5 +1/+1 counters on it. Okay. Which is a slightly better rate if you're going for the smaller amount. You've got Hydra Broodmaster for 4 and 2 green. It's got Monstrosity X, so you pay double X and then a green. So for each X, you have to pay 1 and 2, and you get 1 counter. But you don't get 1 counter for per X. You get it for, basically you have to pay 2 to get 1 counter. When it becomes monstrous, you put XXX green Hydra's tokens onto the battlefield, and she is a 7/7. You've got Loyal Guardian, which is a ringer in this deck. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So basically you're putting 2 counters on each creature you control. Got Arcane Signet. You tap, add 1 mana of any color. Waxing Moon. You transform up to one target werewolf you control. Creatures you control gain trample until end of turn. Now, this one is mostly for giving the creatures in this deck that don't already have trample, giving them trample. So a lot of these you'll see don't have trample, so you needed ways to give it to them. Harmonize, 2 and 2 green, draw 3 cards. Sword of the Animist, for 2 mana, and then equipped creature gets +1/+1, and whenever equipped creature attacks, you may search your library for a basic land, put it onto the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. And it costs 2 to equip. Got Tuskguard Captain for 2 and a green. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample, and has Outlast. To pay a green, tap it, put a 1/1 counter on this creature, and it's a 2/3. Got Circuitous Route for 3 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic lands or gate cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. That recently has gotten to be a very good card, being that with all the new gates coming out, a gate-themed deck. I'll eventually review my Shrines, Gods, Gates deck. Yep. You've got Llanowar Visionary for 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and then it taps to add a green. It's a 2/2. So basically, it'll replace itself in your hand. You've got Cultivate for 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basics. Put 1 on the battlefield tapped, 1 into your hand, shuffle your library. Stetisan Training. I probably butchered that, so I'm sorry. It's 1 and a green. Enchant creature you control. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has trample. I do typically like those cards that say when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and then it has its own little effect. You've got Oran Reef Hydra for 4 and 2 green. It's a 5/5 trample. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Oran Reef Hydra. If that land is a forest, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it instead. So if you had that out and your commander, you would have, if a forest came in, you'd put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Yep. Craterhoof Behemoth. Bet none of y'all saw that coming, huh? When there's a battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. This is a finisher all day long. Yep. Nessian Hornbeetle. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control another creature with power 4 or greater, put a +1/+1 counter on Nessian Hornbeetle. So if you control your commander, you get a +1 counter on it, but instead you put 2, so it'd be a 4/4. You've got Armorcraft Judge for 3 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. I'm going to butcher this again, but you've got Ilisaean Caryatid. Yep, that's a failure, but whatever. For 1 and a green, you add 1 mana of any color. And then if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, add 2 mana instead. And it's a 1/1. You've got Genesis Hydra for X and 2 green. When you cast Genesis Hydra, reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put a non-land permanent card with converted mana cost X or less from among them onto the battlefield. Then shuffle the rest into your library. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So this is, what all those cards in the deck are doing that give us trample. They're helping these creatures that don't already have it. Lifeblood Hydra. It's got X and 3 green. Trample. Enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When it dies, you gain life and draw cards equal to its power. Not bad, especially since your commander will double the amount of counters that it goes into. So if you do 3, so a 6 mana total, you get a 6/6. You've got Voracious Hydra for X and 2 green. When it enters the battle, it's got trample, enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. When it enters the battlefield, choose 1, double the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So what that means is with your commander, if you paid 2 into X, you could then have it double the amount of counters, so it would be 4, but then you would double it. You would double the 4. So it would be 8. No, sorry. It would end up being 6 total. Yeah, because you would be putting 2 extra. All right. Oh, and sorry, and then the other one is the other option is Voracious Hydra, fights target creature you don't control. Got Protein Hydra, X and a green, enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. If damage will be dealt to Protein Hydra, prevent that damage and remove that many +1/+1 counters. Whenever one +1/+1 counter is removed from it, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it at the beginning of the end step. Got Lightning Greaves, 2 mana, equipped creature has haste and shroud, and equip 0. Whisperer of the Wild, for 1 and a green, you tap, add a green, you tap, add it to add 2 green, activate only if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Yavimaya Elder, for 1 and 2 green, when it dies, you may search your library for up to 2 basic lands, reveal them, put them into your hand, shuffle your library. You can pay 2, sack it, draw a card. You've got Hardened Scales, and it's an enchantment for 1 green. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters will be put on a creature you control, that many +1/+1 counters on it. That many +1/+1/+1 counters, so an additional, are put on it instead. Got Pride Malkin, the 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. Inspiring Call, for 2 and a green. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. They gain indestructible until end of turn. Capricopian, X and a green, enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and then it gets a little tricky. For 2 mana, you can put a +1/+1 counter on Capricornia. Then you may reselect which player it is attacking. Only the player it is attacking may activate this ability, and only during the declared attacker's step. It can't attack its controller. Okay. And this is one of my favorite cards from Midnight Hunt. I have this in my own mono green deck, but this is Unnatural Growth, and it's an enchantment for 4 green and a colorless, and it has, hold on, let me try to get this down a little bit. Okay. At the beginning of combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. So that's not just your combat, that is every combat. Fantastic card. It's definitely won me a game or two. We've got Steelbane Hydra for X and 2 green. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. You can pay 2 and a green, remove a counter, destroy target artifact or enchantment. Fertilid, and it's 2 and a green. It enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters. Pay 1 and a green, remove a counter from it. Target player searches the library for a basic land, puts it onto the battlefield tapped, shuffles their library. So with your commander out, this gets 4 +1/+1 counters, and then if you do something like with Loyal Guardian or any of the others that give you counters, you basically can pull all the basic lands out of your deck, and then you're just drawing gas. Got Nihilia's Forerunner for 4 and a green. Trample, other creatures you control have trample. It's a 5/3. Talons of the Wildwood for 1 and a green. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has trample. You pay 2 and a green, return it from your graveyard to your hand. Hungering Hydra for X and a green. When enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. It can't be blocked by more than one creature. When it's dealt damage, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. It must survive the damage to get the +1/+1 counters. Okay. We've got Spore Frog. Sacrifice Spore Frog, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn. Hydra's Growth for 2 and a green, enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on enchanted creature. At the beginning of your upkeep, double the number of +1/+1 counters on enchanted creature. The Crowd Goes Wild for X and a green. It has assist, which usually isn't important, but another player can pay up to X on this spell's cost. You choose the value of X. Support X. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures. Each creature with a +1/+1 counter on it gains trample until end of turn. New Horizons for 2 and a green, enchant land. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Enchanted land has tap, add 2 mana of any color. Migration Path for 3 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic lands. Put them onto the battlefield tapped. Shuffle your library. And it also has cycling 2. So instead of doing that, you could pay 2 to draw a card. You've got Abundance for 2 and 2 green. If you draw a card, you may instead choose land or non-land and reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card of the chosen kind. Put that card into your hand and put all other cards revealed this way on the bottom of your library in any order. Scavenging Ooze for 1 and a green. Pay a green, exile a target card from a graveyard. If that was a creature card, put a +1/+1 counter on Scavenging Ooze and you gain 1 life. Return of the Wild Speaker. Choose 1. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. Arbor Armament for 1 green. You put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature gains reach until end of turn. Garruk's Uprising for 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. Kalonian Hydra for 3 and 2 green. It's a big boy. It gets trample, enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. When it attacks, you double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. Not just this one, but each creature you control. So every creature is getting double. And with your commander being out, it's even more. Garruk Unleashed for 2 and 2 green. It's a planeswalker. For the +1, it's up to 1 target creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample until end of turn. -2 is create a 3/3 green beast token. Then if an opponent controls more creatures than you, put a loyalty counter on Garruk Unleashed. And then for the -7, it is you get an emblem with at the beginning of your end step, you may search your library for a creature card, put it onto the battlefield, shuffle your library. Okay, so here's a big thing. With your commander, that means that as soon as this planeswalker comes out, you get to put 8 planeswalker loyalty counters on it, and you can ult it immediately if you have your commander out and you play this. Nasty. Let's get this flipped. It looks like when we were playing we didn't flip them. But we've got Dormant Grove for 3 and a green. At the beginning of your upkeep, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Then, if that creature has toughness 6 or greater, transform Dormant Grove. And then we'll look at the back again. Vigilance. Other creatures you control have vigilance. Pretty good. Far Wandering for 2 and a green. Search your library for a basic land. Put that card onto the battlefield. Shuffle your library. If you have 7 or more cards are in your graveyard, instead search your library for up to 3 basic lands. Put them onto the battlefield tapped. Shuffle your library. Kalonian Hydra Expedition for 1 and a green. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can put a quest counter on this. Remove 3 quest counters, sack it, search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put them onto the battlefield tapped, shuffle your library. Seer Sundial for 4 mana. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card. Ravenous Slime for 2 and a green. Can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. If a creature an opponent controls would die, instead exile it and put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to that creature's power onto Ravenous Slime. Hero's Bane enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it. You pay 2 and 2 green, put X +1/+1 counters on Hero's Bane, where X is its power. Kodama's Reach for 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic lands, reveal those cards, put one onto the battlefield tapped, and the other into your hand, shuffle your library. Branching Evolution for 2 and a green. It's an enchantment with, if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, put twice that many +1/+1 counters on that creature instead. Got a Soul Ring. Gargos Vicious Watcher for 3 and 3 green. It's an 8/7 Hydra with Vigilance. Hydra spells cost 4 less to cast. And then it has, whenever a creature you control becomes a target of a spell, Gargos Vicious Watcher fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Ooh, Primordial Hydra, yep. X and 2 green. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, double the number of +1/+1 counters on Primordial Hydra, and it has Trample as long as it has 10 or more +1/+1 counters on it. Very easy to do. Got Omenath, Locus of Mana for 2 and a green. Green mana doesn't empty from your mana pool as steps and phases end, and it gets +1/+1 for each green mana in your mana pool. Fierce Empath for 2 and a green. When it enters the battlefield, search your library for search your library for a creature card with mana value 6 or greater. Reveal it, put it in your hand, shuffle your library. Experiment 1. It costs 1 green and has Evolve. When a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it has greater power or toughness than this creature, you put a +1/+1 counter on this. You can remove 2 counters and regenerate this. You've got Mana Gorger Hydra, and it's got Trample, and whenever a player casts a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Mana Gorger Hydra. Whip Tongue Hydra. This is how you deal with those flyers. For 5 and a green, it's got Reach, and then when it enters the battlefield, destroy all creatures with flying, and then you put a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature destroyed this way. And then Song of Freyalise. 1 and a green until your next turn. Creatures you control gain tap, add 1 mana of any color, and that happens for 2 turns. And then the third one is put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible until end of turn. Okay, and then you've got last one here is Invigorating Surge for 2 and a green. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you can, on target creature, then double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature. So it only works for 1 creature, but then you put 1 on and then you double. Yeah, guys, it seems like a pretty straightforward deck. You want to get a lot of creatures on board, start doubling those counters, and that's about it. So what we are gonna do is I'm just gonna let you know that we have a couple more commanders that we'll eventually review. This one here is a precon, so we'll get to that review eventually, but I have these 2 homebrews, Admiral Beckett Brass, and then Atla Palani Nest Tender. It's all about making eggs, sacking them, and putting out some big beaters. All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed getting to review this deck as a kind of a beginner's deck. Please do feel free to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment about what I can do different, what I can do better. I always want to be able to make a little better content and get more subscribers. To the last person that subscribed, thank you so much. Leave a comment and I'll give you a shout out if you subscribe and you let me know that you subscribed. I've only have 6 subscribers, so I'll know if you did or not. All right. Thank you all and have a good evening.